Proceedings are unlikely to be covered by parliamentary privilege. Are you ready? Order, order. Welcome to this meeting of Speakers Committee for the Electoral Commission. We're here today to consider the new 5-year plans, main estimates, the Local Government Boundary Commission for England and the Electoral Commission. We'll hear firstly from the Local Government Boundary Commission for England. Could our witnesses introduce themselves for the record, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm Colin Mellors and I chair the Local Government Boundary Commission for England.
And I'm Ailsa Irvine, I'm the Chief Executive.
Okay. Colin, would you like to briefly outline your new 5-year corporate plan?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to come and talk to you about our 5-year plan. It's always a very useful occasion for us, and we've appreciated each opportunity to come and explain to you what we're doing. The year just finishing has been a fairly successful year for us. We've completed 24 reviews, 7 related alterations, and we've had about 3,900 submissions, and our recommendations will affect about 7.6 million electors. So it's been fairly busy. All of our reviews were completed on time, to budget, and we hope with good quality and with signs of very reasonably good high customer satisfaction. We've also made some other changes and improvements to our engagement and mapping. Looking forward, we will set out in our corporate plan the 3 main strands that we're wanting to work on over the coming period. And they are not going to be very surprising to you. They're about the quality of our reviews, how we do them, how we can make them even better and more rigorous. They are about how we can engage more people, which is increasingly challenging. It's something I suspect you may want to ask about, of how we do engage people in the work that we do. And also we want to make the best and most efficient and effective use of our resources. Clearly, a key feature of this coming period, which we've not experienced in this way before, are the consequences of the English Devolution White Paper, which we are still working very hard with the Minister's Department and others to try to understand what it is it's likely to mean for us. But we want to make sure that we are there and able to support that wherever possible, and we're committed so to doing. Obviously, that piece of work has influenced our budget, our estimates this year, about which I'm sure you'll want to ask more.
Excellent. Jeremy.
On exactly that note. So, as you say, probably the most eye-catching figure in your note on the estimate is the 32% increase that you have largely asked for because of the consequences of the White Paper. You'll appreciate that we've asked for the government's view on all of this, and the response says that there is limited supporting information in what these requirements, i.e. from the White Paper, will be, or how the funding uplift reflects these requirements. So if they don't know, how do you know in order to make an assessment of what it might cost you extra?
Very good question. May we answer it in 2 parts? I'll say a little bit about the context, and Ailsa, you can explain about the numbers, as it were. Clearly, what is happening or could happen is going to have a major impact upon our work and the local government landscape, the largest for, I was going to say a generation, probably more than 1 generation. And we want to be absolutely ready and able to support those local authorities and the government's aspirations in bringing about that. There is a lot of uncertainty, but it's clear that it will have an impact upon our work. It's already done so. For example, that 40 of the reviews which are currently in the organisation are live reviews. We've paused in line with what good practice has been elsewhere. We've paused them at a careful position at the end of each stage so that if reorganisation didn't happen, we've not wasted that work and they've not wasted their time. But it would not be good use of their time to carry on with that. So that has impacted upon our programme. The others will carry on. Where it's an authority that's unlikely to be affected, we simply will carry on. We're looking to bring forward other reviews where that is possible and to do other kinds of work. But we are unsure precisely what will be required of us, but we want to make sure that because the government is clearly wishing to move at pace in its work, and we mustn't be the people who slow them down in any way and the things that we do. We are talking very frequently and very closely with CLG, with the local authority organisations and groupings, and also drawing upon the work that we did. We've had three much smaller tranches of reorganisation in recent times, in 17 to 19 in Dorset, which we talked about before, and in 19 to 21 in Northamptonshire and Buckinghamshire, and then in 21 to 23 in North Yorkshire, Somerset, and what was the former Cumbria. So we've drawn upon all of that experience. One thing we know that we are going to do, or imagine we will help with, is in the interim arrangements to make sure authorities can get started. In an ideal world, we'd like to do a review before they start, rather than disturbing them afterwards. That isn't going to be possible, I suspect, in almost every case. Therefore, we've developed over those three tranches ways of working with CLG and with the authorities affected to give them some useful interim arrangements that would not be too disturbing and distracting if we then came along and did a proper review later on. But we need to be equipped to be able to do whatever work is asked of us, and it may be that the Minister may even approach us and ask us to do some bigger work under what is called Section 4 of the 2007 Act, which is where we'll be looking at the external boundaries of local authorities. All of those will require new... you looked a bit sceptical, Mr. Speaker, and that may well be the case. It may well be doing that later on. That might be retro-engineering later on and getting those sorted out later. But all of those things are the things that we want to be in a position to do as and when asked, and to do so with good quality and swiftly. By any definition, there's going to be a lot of work there somewhere, because there are 21 areas being reviewed, 21 counties. Even if they're all only one authority, that would still give us 21. It's unlikely that everyone's going to be a whole unitary. So there's going to be a significant number, and at a fair speed. So we want to put ourselves in that position. And of course, Ailsa and our colleagues have been thinking through how we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Colin says, when we don't know the scope or the scale of exactly what we're going to be asked to do, we can only draw from previous experience. So what we've looked to do is to try to make provision that will enable us to bring in any additional capacity or expertise as and when required, so that we can respond positively and quickly to any requests that are made of us. What we don't want to do is to be any barrier to being able to take forward any changes. In terms of actually coming up with the figure that we've estimated, what we have done there is we've looked at, we're a small organisation of 23 people, so actually our ability to move people around and to work flexibly is limited. So if we're going to take on any additional activity, we will need to take on additional people to support us with delivering that activity. So the funding that we've estimated here is based on the cost of bringing in an additional review team to be able to make sure that we can manage any activity coming out of this alongside of existing core functions, but also to give us some space to buy in expertise that we don't have in-house, such as legal advice.
Thank you. Colin's obviously described a little bit about the prioritisation that may change based on what you're expecting to happen next. Can I ask two related questions about how this have a knock-on effect on the rest of your business, though? One is about how you conduct periodic reviews more generally. Again, I take the point that you might choose to advance some and de-escalate some others, but is there any other effects you want to tell us about on periodic reviews? And the second is more broadly on your performance metrics. What effect are you expecting this to have? I suppose, A, if you do get another £500,000, and if you don't, and B, if you don't.
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the impact on the ability to do periodic reviews, I think we are comfortable that the way we are managing our programme now, that we are in a battle rhythm where we can review all authorities from time to time within every 3 to 4 electoral cycles. So we don't now have the tail that we had previously, where we had some that had been a long time since having been reviewed. And we're comfortable that we can continue to manage that with the flexible rolling programme that we've got, that we can manage to still accommodate the periodic reviews alongside other activity. It may be that we need to look at the pacing of things, and one of the activities that we've outlined that we want to complete in the new corporate plan period is to look at the review process to see if we can do it any more quickly without losing the robustness of the quality. So again, that will also help us with how we kind of manage the throughput as we go through it. In terms of performance metrics, with setting the new corporate plan, we've identified new metrics that we want to look at. So we do still want to look at the number of reviews that we start, and we do expect that may not hit 25 this year, because it may be other activity that we are doing as opposed to what we've done in the past when it's been solely review business. But a lot of our metrics are actually focused on the quality of what we do and how we work. So we're actually looking at levels of feedback on the positive feedback on the review process, levels of confidence, or levels of engagement, and actually that will apply to whatever activity we're doing, whether it be in relation to new authorities or to existing authorities being reviewed.
Lawrence.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just following on from that, obviously you're increasing that day-to-day spending, and you've said that you've got a provision of 5% for pay awards for 25-26. This seems significantly higher according to Treasury. Just wanted a bit more background and clarity on how you reached that 5% figure.
Yeah, I mean, it is a provision at this stage. It's not making any assumptions about what award we may make. 5% of our staffing budget in this context is £58,000. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that we were able to accommodate once the civil service pay guidance comes into effect. We will, of course, have regard to that as we're required to, and then make an award within that. But for now, in the absence of that, when we created the main supply estimate, we've simply rolled over the provision that we included last year at 58,000.
So again, just going back to your provisional uplift request, it shows that year on year you actually spend less. Is there any area where you could probably, instead of asking for that increase in 5%, you could absorb that from your additional costs that you've already had and your reserves? Well,
in the current financial year, we're actually forecasting to come in much closer to budget than we have in previous years. So we're forecasting to come in within 1% of our agreed budget, excluding the risk and resilience budget, which we haven't needed to spend. I think as an organisation, we spend 2/3 of our budget on staffing, and we have a low turnover rate, so we don't have an awful lot of room for manoeuvre there. Another 15% then on premises, where we have already delivered a significant saving in the past financial year. So actually, we're getting into the territory that while we obviously continue to try to find efficiencies and to deliver value for money, to find any other savings is likely to result in us having to stop doing some of the areas of activity that we've outlined in the plan.
So if you're saying that you're going to base that and that you're going to come much closer to your overall budget this year, further on in your corporate plan, you've got your increase in staffing cost again for 27-28 onwards.
At that stage, the increase from 27-28 onwards on the staffing cost is purely building in a provision for a cost of living increase annually. There's no anticipated further growth to the establishment from 27-28 onwards at this stage.
So what modelling would you do for the staff pay awards for that year? Would you still base it on, obviously you would look at inflation and CPI?
Yeah, I mean, we've put that provision at a flat level across the corporate plan period for our medium-term financial planning. But when we come back with the estimate for that year in due course, we will be able to take into account the life circumstances at that point.
Thank you.
Ailsa.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to talk about customer satisfaction, and in the report it states that your customer satisfaction rates went down from 77% to 71%, and it also mentions that the response rates went down as well. I'd like to understand what you understand from this data. So what is it telling you? Is there a difference in the satisfaction rates from people who've had a different experience? So reorganisation, people felt differently about that than the from time to time reviews. And what have you done differently as a response to the satisfaction data that you've had?
Customer satisfaction is critical to every organisation, I think. It's particularly challenging to the public services because often we're asking questions about were you happy with the experience, did we listen to you, did we treat you well, was our materials good? They are probably answering more, did I like the outcome? So it's quite difficult. It would be very difficult to ask customer satisfaction of judges, of people in the dock. It could depend upon the verdict, I suspect. But it is something we listen to, we take very seriously. In terms of the statistics, the figures for 23-24 were a bit lower. They were in the low 70s. They're generally in the mid to high 70s. If for what it's worth, it was 71.5% that year. The year just about to end, it's going to be 79.2%, which I think is the highest we've had for about 5 years. I'm more concerned, in a way, about what the data tell us and how we get people to actually respond to us. And that's the biggest challenge, because by definition, I suspect the lower the response rate, the more likely it is that the robust comments are going to be those who were unhappy rather than those who were happy, because we tend to say when we don't like something rather more than when we do like something. And that's a particular challenge for us when we do reviews. We ask people to tell us what they like at our draft recs, because if they don't, one or two people might say, well, we don't like it, we might reverse the decision, which was probably the better decision, had we pursued it. So we are doing a lot of work this coming year on how we can maximise customer satisfaction and indeed engagement in general terms. By coincidence, about 2 weeks ago, we hosted the inter-commission meeting of all the nation's commissions, local and national in the UK. And this was really our biggest focus of conversation. And we're looking at what we can do all together to maximise those things. And this is essentially about helping understanding, making it easier for people to access what we're doing, etc. Alongside the numbers, I think we probably learn more from what we do when we collect formative information from local authorities during the review, qualitative information, which was trying to dig beneath the surface and say, what is it that's working okay, what's not working well. And the lessons are not surprising. From the public it is about, can you make it easier for us to know what's going on? Can you make it easier for us to engage with the material? Can we help make the mapping look simpler, etc., etc.? From the officers, from the officials, it's about, can you help us engage and brief the councillors more than at the moment, because one of the we commissioned some work from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny a couple of years ago, and one of the big lessons from that is what gets them involved in a review is if the council leadership, executive and non-executive, say this is something worth doing, others will buy into it. If they're disinterested at the top, then it tends to permeate what goes on further down. But so helping them with that, greater certainty about delay, about dates, not delaying, and also giving them plenty of time at the end of the review to put the new arrangements in place. One of the things we focus on, because it comes out of the feedback we've had from these people, from this source, is that early and continuing engagement of touching the touchstones with the authority. How's it going? It's just little small things. And Ailsa and I spend a lot of time at the very beginning of engaging with the leadership, with the party group leaderships, and also with the full council to get that buy-in, that engagement, so that they feel as though they're owning it. And we always use the phrase, and I think we deliver on it, that we say we do reviews with them and not to them. But there's a lot more still to be done.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, you no longer list staff turnover as a top risk. Why was it removed as a risk even when it was rising?
So it was removed as a risk in August 2023, and that was after a period at the beginning of that financial year that there had, as I understand it, there'd been a high number of vacancies, and it was removed as a risk as they'd made significant progress towards filling those vacancies, and there was confidence at that stage around the work in place to recruit and induct people that the risk of losing skilled people to the organisation was being minimised. But I think it's also important to note that we actually have traditionally and typically low levels of turnover, and actually since that midpoint in 23-24 turnover has fallen dramatically, and in fact in this current financial year we've only had one leaver, and that was someone at the end of a fixed term contract. So we're finding, we're not complacent about that, but we are finding that the investment that we're making in our people, in making the LGBTE a great place to work, is helping to stabilise that turnover.
I suspect, sorry, just add one sentence, I suspect there was quite a few organisations that turnover in that year, because it's the people stayed in where they were during the pandemic and immediately afterwards, and I think they suddenly went, it's dropped now, as I say, not well in just one fixed term one, and we're really pleased with the results of our staff survey, which show that we always outperform that of the civil service as a whole and similar smaller bodies. Because we offer good conditions of work, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that will stay. But people will leave at some point because it's a small, flat organisation, and you want people to develop and move on in their careers.
No, I would be right, therefore, I think, to characterise the organisation, because you're going to have, as you've referenced, Professor Mellors, with the local government devolution white paper, significant very concentrated demand on your skills and time. You have confidence of the stability of the organisation to meet those demands, which will meet political aspirations, but also deal with sort of customer satisfaction as well. Is that an accurate characterisation?
I think so. You've just applied for a job in our comms department. That's brilliant.
Well, that's very good.
Absolutely spot on.
We will, of course, discuss terms afterwards, but I'm sure we can come to some sort
Perhaps
of arrangement.
you'll have a view about the 5% then allowance for
Marvellous,
the pay rise.
excellent. You've got yourself a deal.
Absolutely. It's been the most difficult year to set a budget and an estimate, because we don't want to let anybody down. I'm not going to say we love giving money back, but if you look at our record, we have a money of being very prudent with it. We take that very seriously. We operate it in that kind of atmosphere, but we do want to be in a position to be able to do what is asked of us, and it's clearly a difficult period. It's going to impact upon us significantly. Many things will come to us very late. We're going to have to be nimble and fleet of foot, and it's likely to be a lumpy programme for a period of time. So we find a way of keeping that going, and we're absolutely committed to working with whoever, but we do need to keep our ear close to the ground at the minute and be credible so that we can find out what is happening.
Thank you. Can I ask you about one element of the proposed capital expenditure, and what I think we would say was forecast to be a significant increase for 26-27, and that is the development of the website. Now, most organisations have a fairly mature and sophisticated website, the web being, a factor of communication life these last several years. In layman's terms, what's all that about?
Yes, I think where we are is we have got a website that I don't think enables us to make the full use of the mapping capability and the technologies that we have developed to engage people effectively in the work that we're doing. We have been running a website survey over the past year to get feedback from users on how they find our website, and we've had quite a bit of feedback about people's ability to find the information that they're looking for, making sure that they understand how to be able to access the things that are relevant to the review in their area. So while we're in a position that we can do some things with limited resource with what we've got with our current website to try to improve that user experience, actually we believe it would be better to do a more fundamental investment in our website to align it more closely with our mapping capability and to really improve the experience and better enable people to be able to provide submissions and engage in the review process. So it is investment that we are looking to do work over the course of this year to develop the specification for what that website would need to deliver, to then go through a tendering process so that we could commit to that spend then in 26-27.
If I may, through you, sir, just sort of pick up on that. I mean, that's understandable and laudable. We referenced in an earlier question the anticipated increase in demand on your services and therefore public engagement. Within that website development, what risk, if any, have you calculated and tried to factor out as best as possible? Either increasing user frustration with a website under construction, or at a time of high demand, or worse, an innovative IT-driven solution, which sounds fantastic on paper, which crashes at the first time it has an interaction with the public, leading to an increased sense of frustration and lack of engagement. I mean, is the meshing? I mean, the objective and the aspiration seems clear, but is the meshing and the meeting of the time frame actually optimised?
Yeah, I think we're confident we can manage that in the process. I mean, any switch over to a new website would be carefully timed. We would make sure there was adequate testing, and we wouldn't be doing that at a critical point in any process. And we'd be working through that process to get user input from the outset so that we are making sure that if there is anything innovative, that it does actually work with ordinary members of the public, rather than just being something that seems a nice idea. So I think as we're developing the brief for the website, hopefully that will be around the same time as we're starting to get greater clarity as to some of the timings and the expectations of the work around the white paper, and we will make sure that the two projects align. We can do a lot of the build work in the background and not impact negatively on the user experience. We wouldn't switch over until we were confident that it could deliver.
If it's any reassurance, we have done this a few years back, and a lot of it is about how you set up the thing, be clear about what you're trying to achieve from it, which means it's not IT should be the servant here and not the master of this relationship.
That's where the theory and the practice usually collapses. But I mean, those answers are encouraging. Can I just check one thing, and I'm sure you have, but we would fail in our duty just to sort of put this on the record. Were you to be in the midst of a consultation on a proposal, and during that time there is the switch over from the old to the new, can you guarantee that any consultation responses made on the old system, the outgoing system, isn't lost, that the technologies can talk to each other? Nothing more frustrating than getting to, halfway up the game of snakes and ladders, only to find yourself back at number one again.
That will be an absolute cast iron requirement of the work that we commission. We will absolutely make sure that we don't lose anything between two stools.
It's massive penalties applied if it fails.
Yeah, no. Ailsa wasn't here when we did it before, but it did work very, very well, because exactly for the reasons you just said. We were very clear that there had to be an overlap. We were very clear that the one system had to work before the other one was switched off. We would also, I think, reschedule if necessary that switchover if we were partway through some important work, say on, for example, in connection with reorganisation. Our top priority, I didn't say anything when you were asking about performance measures, but the performance measures for us that matter are we the same whether we're doing devolution work, the electoral review work, or indeed helping support the white paper. They are about doing things properly, on time, to quality, to things, and other things will need to fit in around that. And I think that would be
That's great.
Yes.
Okay. That concludes our evidence without the gun boundary commission for England. Oh,
No, I had one additional...
I'm sorry, I thought you...
No, sorry, which I think Lisa may want to come in as well. I just wanted to sort of slightly cast forward when we get into the weeds, and Colin, you very sweetly mentioned Dorset. You can always get one of the interlocutors on side when you mentioned their home county, so thank you for doing that.
Well, Lancashire's an excellent county as well, which would be interesting.
Well,
Very brave.
The Supreme Council.
I've heard the rumour, but I believe it's never been pressed to a division, and I think it's probably best to leave it there.
Much bigger county.
Yes.
My grandparents came from Dorset, so I do have an interest in all that.
Oh, there we are. I knew we got on. There we are. I just wanted to ask you about the route to achieving the ward boundaries of new authorities. You referenced there's experience in Cumbria, Cornwall, Wiltshire, Shropshire, Dorset. My take, and I know, Professor Mellors, you and I have discussed this, that creating a new council and creating entirely new ward boundaries eases some of those local political tensions, because nobody has first dibs on the ward because they've got incumbency, because it effectively mirrors the old county division or whatever it may happen to be. My understanding is that I think government is open to rational persuasion on the best approach. Can you assure us that you will, drawing on that canon of evidence and experience that you've collated, impress upon ministers that is, I'm not suggesting it's the only way, but from my analysis, that does seem to be the best way of approaching it, to iron out political wrinkles and crinkles locally?
Yeah, I hope I've understood that, and please come back at me if I've not. We emphasise, when we're doing our work, if it's a new authority, it is a new authority. It's not merging of some existing authorities. It's not tweaking about it. Even when we do a normal review, we say we take all the lines off the map, bar the external ones, unless you're in East Yorkshire, where there's about 4 metres of erosion each year, because the external boundaries will not change. All the internal ones start afresh, ab initio, even though they may well come back, because they were sensible then, and they are still sensible now. In terms of the new authorities, you won't have time, I won't bore you with the details, but with each of those 3 phases of reviews, of reorganisation in the past, we've helped with them in slightly different ways. And we ourselves can't do a review until it legally exists. So prior to that, we're giving help, advice, support, etc. Is that this time we have government has helpfully agreed that they wanted to use our guidance in terms of deciding a council size, the number of councillors from the outset.
I think it's about 500,000, Jim McMahon was saying.
No, there's not the number of councillors. Sorry, exactly. Yeah, council size is not the population or the electorate. And we have a difference there, because that figure which government is quoting is about population. We work on electors. But they're broadly, this is the number of councillors. And in earlier reorganisations, what they've done is because nobody else can draw boundaries apart from us. We can't draw them unless we do an electoral review, so we use existing ones somewhere or other. But initially, what they would do when they did, let's say, Buckinghamshire, they gave each of the Buckinghamshire divisions 3 councillors per existing division, which created 157, I think it was initially. Very difficult to right-size that subsequently. What we did with the latest tranche in Yorkshire and Cumbria was that we got CLG and the council, the new council, to come up with a meaningful number up front, which is what they did, and we are sticking with that. They've agreed now they're sticking with that roughly. In the latest invitation to bid for reorganisation, each new authority has been asked to suggest an appropriate number. We're not involved in that, but they're using our going. So it's set up with the right size, and then we create boundaries using...
And you create the boundaries, not the government?
No. The order, we don't create the boundaries. Initially, the boundaries will be created by the order using existing divisions in some form, whether the county divisions,
the board of the council
or
will
the
be
parishes.
set by the order, but the ward boundaries would be set by the work of the commission.
No, they will be set initially for their first. I don't know. Sorry, the answer is I really don't know, because we did it in Dorset. We did it ourselves. Yes. Because we started a review. It was an accelerated review. In Buckinghamshire, nobody did it. It was just using an existing one. What happened, sorry, this is not our decision, but what happened in Yorkshire and Cumbria is they used amalgam of parish, county and district boundaries to come up with something that would give them the right size of council. We are now in the process of going along and doing a proper electoral review and amending those so they become meaningful. But it means you're not having to change radically the size of the council, and it means that you're not having to change your governance, because the governance structure within the council has been roughly based upon the correct number. So we go to it afresh from that point. But as I say, I hope I was careful and clear there. It is not our decision initially, and I don't know how government are intending to do it.
Just to clarify what you said your guidance is based on the number of electors.
No. Yes. When we're talking about the size of a council, that is the number of electors. When we're talking about the number of councillors, that the guidance we've given is about the number of councillors that would exist in a given authority, and we've told them how we approach that question when we're doing a proper review. Sorry, it's a bit complicated. I do apologise.
Yeah. Just to pick up on that, because I'm very interested of what might be coming down into Lancashire at some point. Presumably, because you've got county divisions, you've already set all of Lancashire, except for Blackpool and Blackburn, have already got a geographical area that you can fit into. So working on that basis, 2 councillors will give you, putting 3 districts together, roughly an authority of 60 councillors. Would that be too many in your view?
Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't actually ask that question, because we start with a piece of blank paper when we do a normal electoral review.
It would save all the review having to take place.
No, but we ask them how many councillors seems to be appropriate on basis of you need elected members to provide strategic leadership. You need elected members to provide internal governance, scrutiny, and increasingly externality, because local authorities are more and more about place shaping rather than delivering services, and then for representation.
All right, I'll try a different way. Have you got a minimum number and a maximum number to say a population of 400,000?
We don't, Mr. Speaker, because there's no formula as such, but we take the view that any authority because each authority will be different, it depends on its topography, its numbers, etc., economic changes.
If you're working on an electorate
we would be reluctant to agree a council of below 30 because we think it is suboptimal. And we would be very reluctant to have a council above 3 figures, probably above 90-95, because again, it becomes too difficult to run and manage.
No, just give me an indication of what people should be looking for as reorganisation approaches. Simon?
Yeah, so just to clarify, because I appreciate it is multi-layered and complex, but there is. Can I just have clear in my mind that it is, when the appropriate request has been made, it's the independent, politically neutral commission that devises the ward or division, whatever one's going to call it, boundaries.
Absolutely, completely true. And in an ideal world, we would prefer to do that before an authority came into being, but to do that would mean delaying the current reorganisation, which people are keen to get going. So we will offer whatever support we can to help CLG making its order and the local authorities in putting forward their proposals to come up with something that made sense from the outset. We will then do a completely independent review later on.
The reason why I asked, Mr. Speaker, was I think there was an element of opaqueness in some WPQs recently that seemed to suggest that a reading of the answers might have led the reader to the conclusion that either ward boundaries could be set by the Commission or directly by the Department. And that latter option, I don't think is an option, and I think would be fundamentally undesirable, because they need to have the imprimatur of that independent commission who looks at it on the experience and the numerics, rather than those are the only criteria that they have at play.
This is a decision for others, obviously, not for us. We would certainly like, if there was the opportunity to do reviews wherever possible before something starts. That doesn't seem sensible and feasible with the desired timetable. We managed to do something a little bit quicker in Dorset and Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. So we did some preparatory work, but then we took over immediately the order went through. The third way, which is what we did in Yorkshire, the most recent one, was simply to help whoever was doing it. The proposal comes from the authority, the decision is made by government, ultimately by Parliament, using existing boundaries, whether they are districts, wards,
or county divisions,
or indeed parishes or parish council wards.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa.
Just on this point, you mentioned, Professor Mellors, that different approaches have been undertaken in different councils in some of the recent work that you're doing, but that it's ultimately government or parliamentary decision. How are you feeding in the lessons that you've learned from this process worked better, this process did not? How are you feeding that in to make sure that government isn't having to start with a blank piece of paper and learn lessons you've already learned?
Ailsa, I think you might want to pick this up. I mean, in a sense, there's nobody to feed into at the moment, because we're still in that period of trying to understand how the process is going to operate. We will simply try and make our knowledge, our expertise available. And we were talking about it yesterday. We're almost certainly going to have workshops. When it's appropriate to do so, we'll have workshops with anybody who wants to come along and listen to explain how a review works. But we can't ourselves do anything until an order has been approved, and an order has to have a map attached to it.
And we are having regular dialogue with MHCLG officials, and we are making sure that they do understand the wealth of knowledge and experience that we have, so that they do have access to that in making their decisions.
That's great. That concludes our evidence with the Local Government Boundary Commission for England. Thank you for joining us today. We'll now move over to the Electoral Commission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
So, thank you. Good to see you, Colin. Our guest from the Electoral Commission, could you please introduce yourselves for the record? We'll start with Vijay.
Vijay Rangarajan, Chief Executive of the Electoral Commission.
I'm John Pullinger, I'm the Chair of the Electoral Commission.
I'm Chris Blease, I'm the Finance and Corporate Director of the Commission.
John, would you like to start briefly outlining your new 5-year corporate plan and main estimate for 25-26?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This corporate plan has been the product of an intense period of listening and engagement with our stakeholders. We've engaged with political parties, with electoral administrators, with other regulators, interested organisations. We've engaged particularly with the government through the Defending Democracy Task Force and through the Minister and her colleagues in the department. We've also had the opportunity to engage with committees of this House, the Parliament Constitutional Affairs Committee with Mr Hoare and the Housing, Communities and Local Government Committee with Ms Shalomi, and of course lots of individual members too, including each of you. And we felt this plan, as the product of that, has got the support of the community we are here to serve. We've put parallel documents to the Senate and the Scottish Parliament since we report to them too, and they have seen and approved the parallel documents. So the plan here, briefly, has two core elements to it. The first is to make sure we do a good job in our basic function of overseeing elections and regulating political finance, making sure we deliver for voters, we deliver for parties, campaigners and candidates, and we deliver for electoral administrators the support and guidance that they need each and every time an election takes place. But the extra thing in this plan is the recognition that our electoral system is part of the UK's critical national infrastructure, and it needs investment if it's to thrive into the future. And we see 5 areas of investment as being really important. The first is to invest in support for voters, particularly young voters and voters with disabilities. We need investment to modernise the system, which is increasingly out of date and out of touch with the way people would want elections to be run in 2025 and beyond. We need investment to deal with the various threats that are accumulating, mis and disinformation, concerns about foreign interference, and, dear to your heart, Mr Speaker, the increasing levels of abuse, intimidation and threats that candidates and administrators face when they are going about their work to be involved in elections. We also think it needs investment in getting an evidence base to make sure any decisions that this House makes on the future of the electoral system are well founded in evidence. And finally, we want to complete the work we started with your support in the last Parliament to strengthen the Commission itself. So what's the cost? The cost is in our main estimate, and I dare say we'll get into questioning on that, but we've reached the number we have through intense scrutiny by Chris and his team of every one of the budget lines in the Commission to make sure we're only asking for what we need to do to deliver the plan. We've looked at these projects, the investment projects, and phased them over several years so that we're spreading the cost. And the strengthening Commission projects, we've prioritised those that will either deliver efficiency savings and save money, or will reduce financial risk. So investments in cybersecurity, IT, finance, procurement, project management, those kinds of skills that will help us be more confident in delivery and more confident in delivery at lowest cost. So I commend it to you, Mr Speaker.
Excellent. Let's start off with Simon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Because I'm a decent chap and out of the goodness of my heart, I gave you 9 million quid. Not of my own money, I hasten to add, for costs related to the general election of last year. What percentage of it did you spend?
We had a slight underspend, if I remember right, Mr Hoare, of the whole amount. You actually gave us, I think, £22.1 million.
It was even more generous than I realised.
Even more generous. That was the sum budget.
The largesse of Hoare knows no bounds. Excellent.
And we spent just under that. I think we can send you exactly the amount, but we didn't go over budget, and that was basically the UK parliamentary general election costs last year.
So there was an underspend. So the question therefore has to be, why is there not a corresponding decrease in this year's main estimate for 25-26?
There is a significant one. So last year, 22.1 million. This year, the event costs, that covers all the elections, and this year will be £11.5 million. So about an £11 million decrease in the costs. The cost, the 11 million, is going to cover media buying for this May's local elections that we've just been hearing about, and campaign production costs for the 2 large elections coming up in 2026 in Scotland and Wales. Overall, our core costs have remained broadly static. We're spending about £1 million more on IT security, and this is really to complete, as John has said, the cybersecurity work that we needed to do after the attacks in the last few years. Where we have increased is £5.4 million for the delivery in this year of the corporate plan projects. And we may want to go into a bit more detail on that, but that balance, going down about 11 million in event costs and up about 5.4 in corporate costs, is the offset.
You predict my next question, which was the 5.4. Now that is quite a significant increase in budget to deliver year 1 of the corporate plan. So what is driving this additional resource request?
The main drivers have been, as John has set out, I think the views of parties and voters and candidates is what we need to do. And maybe it's helpful if I set out the main drivers for the actual cost and what are we actually spending the money on. And these are all things which we hope are going to actively benefit the users of the democratic system and participants in it. The first, just to mention, which will be about 534,000 in this financial year, this next one for the main estimate, is the work with partners, charities and NGOs on stepping up democratic education. I think some of you, Mr. Speaker in particular, kindly came to our Welcome to Your Vote Week last week here in Parliament. There's a huge appetite, and we've seen that in the public research that we've put out for young people to hear more, and it's acute with potentially the franchise changing to include voters at 16. This is an area we think we need to accelerate on this year, because it's only about 3 years till some of those young people may be voting, and we need to start the process. The second big area of spend will be another about £400,000 on how do we do campaigning on registration voter ID. We'd like to modernise that, and particularly as the registration system may be evolving, we're going to have to inform people how they can register and what kinds of assisted or potentially automatic registration might work. The third is back to political finance online, where we've restructured the programme completely. I'm very happy to explain how later, and that is both a capital and running cost programme. We've already done the first tranche in this financial year, about 96,000, to actually safeguard all the political parties' data that we hold, taking it out of a bespoke server, putting it into a cloud, and modernising the underlying systems. And the two other slightly smaller projects, but one is in order to support, it's more policy work to support the areas of threat, which John has alluded to, particularly supporting the Speakers' Conference on Abuse and Intimidation, the work with Ofcom, the Department and Defending Democracy Task Force on mis and disinformation in particular, and a slight stepping up of our international work to work with some of our partner commissions to learn the lessons of what threats they're coming under and hopefully trying to avoid that. The final project that costs a bit is Democracy Club, who have done a wonderful job in running the polling station finder. We had 24 million voters access that over the last year. It's used by the BBC, by social media. They no longer want to continue doing this. They want to move into other areas. But we think it's so important. We'd like to take that in-house and modernise it and keep it going. It's a crucial part, including adding things like accessibility information to it. The cost of that this financial year is about £360,000.
Thank you for that. You've referenced a number of those sort of key drivers and pressures, if you will, which make the defending of democracy ever more important. So in essence, you're, for sort of policymakers and check signers, almost sort of pushing on an open door, given the seriousness and level of the issues that you have raised. That can often lead to a reduction in the appetite of forever striving for value for money, greater efficiency, cutting out waste. Notwithstanding the pressures of the task at hand, what assurances can you give us that that other side of the coin, as it were, is at the forefront of your minds and being delivered upon?
I'll give you assurance it is. I mean, just to give you two brief examples. One of them is on political finance online from the previous version of the project. We are unable to use some really much more modern technology to try to deliver it. So we're hoping to do so at a significantly lower cost. Partly we're just looking to use some of the tools that we already have. We're off to see the head of the Government Digital Service in a couple of weeks because we think there are some huge synergies with where the government is going in terms of online service provision, and we don't want to duplicate any of that. We'd like to really work with them. The second is we've taken quite a hard look at, for example, some of the, I mentioned modernising the campaigns we do publicly on voter ID. We're going to step back and not run bespoke voter ID campaigns before by-elections anymore. We don't run registration campaigns. We did initially because they were new. We think voter ID awareness is now high enough. We will still run the big voter ID campaigns before the May election, but we don't need to do so before every by-election. That will save us about £50,000 a time. So where we can, we will indeed step back and cut some of the activity. Where we can be more efficient, we'll be definitely more efficient. And I hope that some of these things will also provide a better service for the same money and so be better value for money.
If you haven't had sight of the Minister's evidence to PACAC yesterday morning. Yes, it was yesterday morning, wasn't it? I recommend it to you. Question I wanted to ask has, I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, just temporarily gone out of my head.
And bring Stephen in while you think
please,
about it.
Please, I'm
Stephen,
so sorry. It has gone completely out of my head.
Stephen wants to ask.
No, it was just to pick up on one of the points that raised there in terms of the devolved administration, because obviously they're in a different electoral cycle. The last time these elections were fought was during a pandemic, so we're a decade actually since we had a run-of-the-mill election. Are you able to look at issues such as cybersecurity and other issues which have evolved quite dramatically since 2021, and are you confident that the resources are there in terms of those challenges that have emerged since the last set of elections? And sorry, secondly, can I just say, delighted that you're keeping Find My Polling Station, because I know they keep changing. I know so many people that I find it valuable, I have to say, sorry, just as an aside.
But certainly as far as the elections for the Scottish Parliament and the Senate are concerned, we've factored in everything we know now to make sure the costs we've put in cover the emerging cyber environment as well as the other challenges that have accumulated since then. And also, as you say, the environment's very different from the last elections. But we've had that discussion separately with the Scottish Parliament corporate body, and there is a significant interest, but they are paying for it. So that's not part of what we're doing today. But we're certainly happy to talk to you afterwards about that. But we've done what we can to learn the lessons we've had from across the UK and apply them in Wales and Scotland for the 2026 round of elections coming up.
I've done 6 and 7.
Let me come back to Simon.
I've remembered. Sorry, I was having a moment. You referenced data, and it was the topic that we were discussing yesterday morning. Certainly the Cabinet Office is very keen to drive forward a much better understanding between government departments about the availability and the desirability of sharing government-held data between departments. And you'll both recall some problems that we had when we were quite keen to try and target people who would be most obviously found on, say, for example, the DWP databases, and couldn't do so because there was a preciousness about data. Are you engaged as a way of trying to reduce costs and reinventing the wheel? Are you engaged with Cabinet Office on ensuring that as a commission you are able to promote electoral registration and other democratic matters through DWP, DVLA, Passport Office, HMRC, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, this is the background that both of us have come from in terms of data and joining it up. So, I mean, Vijay, I want to add, but we've had detailed discussions with DVLA and a variety of other government departments to look at the data they hold and its relevance to what we do, and certainly the ability to join it up. And clearly, working with the Minister and other colleagues across government, there is an opportunity there which we are certainly ready and keen to seize.
And do you see that as a mechanism of potentially reducing, if not reducing costs, then not increasing costs, because you're not having to reinvent the wheel through consultation and wider engagement, because the data is there?
Yes, I'm confident it will reduce costs. Okay. I've seen it done in other areas. If you get it right, it does. Obviously, if you don't get it right, you create even more problems. But I'm confident it can work, and I think between us we will make it work.
And if I could give one example where the costs are not necessarily just to us, but in Northern Ireland, as you know, Mr. Hoare, the system there is a little different, but it does enable voters to be able to check whether they're on the register.
Yes.
David Marshall has pointed out that there were a significant number of checks of that register. We know from our data that before the election, about half of the registration applications were duplicate. People were already on the register. And what that really meant was that electoral registration officers had to do an awful lot of work in going through deduplicating about 500,000 electoral registrations, as well as the voters' own time in having to fill out yet another set of forms. So the more we can help modernise basic things like that, using the data checks, for example, the better.
Thank you.
Lawrence.
Just wanted to touch base on the comment you made, Vijay, not doing a big campaign on voter ID before by-elections. Obviously, if we look at the general election last year, the lowest in terms of turnout in recent years, we generally know that for by-elections, turnout is even much lower. Voter ID, I think figures are around 16,000 were disenfranchised last year in the general election because of voter ID. So, in essence, should we not be saying for a single citizen to lose their right to vote, because of voter ID is one too many, would that not send alarm bells to the Electoral Commission?
I mean, it did, and it's not an easy decision. It's a significant amount of money before every by-election. What we have found is the period before a by-election is too small, it's just too short, and we found very little impact of our own campaigning. We evaluate the campaigning quite strictly. We don't think it actually increased awareness beyond what it would have been at before. So we'd prefer to focus that money where we think it's having more bang for its buck in, for example, this May, when we're going to have a voter ID campaign, and then keeping it going, because we need to maintain the awareness of voter ID for exactly the reasons you give.
Yeah.
And one voter turned away is one too many, absolutely.
You referenced Scotland and Wales, don't forget in London there are all-out elections in 26 as well.
Okay. Lisa.
The Mets have 3 in every 4 years, which I'm sure you're aware of as well. My question for you is about some of the recommendations from previous audits, and we had a very useful report from the NAO which talks about 4 of the recommendations that were rolled forward. 3 of them are still awaiting confirmation. Please tell us more about what these recommendations are and how far along you are with completing them.
Thank you. So, I think I should start by saying that the Commission actually considers that we have met those recommendations and they can be closed. We've discussed that with the National Audit Office, and they will test that as part of their year-end audit and formally confirm their closure. So we think we're in a strong position. Just to summarise them very briefly, 2 of the recommendations relate to the provision of evidence supporting key accounting adjustments and judgments. 1 relates to the timing and quality of the draft accounts, production and the review of those accounts, and the final to governance around and preparedness for a previous finance system. So fairly standard audit recommendations. And as I say, we believe we've met them. The NAO will confirm that. And just to finalise, of course, you've seen the NAO's financial overview, and that overview does highlight the significant work the Commission has carried out to respond to audit recommendations in general, and the majority are now closed.
Okay, that's great. Sir Jeremy.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask a little bit about the corporate plan, and specifically the priorities that you've set out. There are 5 of them. Now, I suspect the answer to this might have to come to us in a bit more detail in writing, but if you can say something in outline at this stage, it would be helpful. What I'm interested in is how you intend to measure success against those priorities as a commission, and how we as a committee can hold you to account on meeting them. So, for example, at the end of a first year, what would you expect to be able to say to us in terms of progress on those priorities?
Well, I'll start, and Vijay might want to add. There's quite a lot of detail in the corporate plan about the metrics that we will judge ourselves by. So for the basic performance standards, we've set percentages. Often they are very high percentage, stretching percentages to make sure we're delivering for our major stakeholders. For the corporate plan projects, what we will do and be held account for is a series of year-by-year milestones that will set out how far along the road we are with delivery of the project and how much we've spent against our initial plan. So you'll be able to judge whether we're on track or not. But the final thing in the plan, which I do want to take this opportunity to point out, is we put in a lot of what we're calling system indicators, that we will not be happy unless we shift the dial, for example, on young people's levels of registration, or on public confidence in the political finance regime, which is very, very low. So we can't do that alone, but we're keeping our eye on the prize of what's going to make a difference for confidence in our system and the running of our system. So you'll see all 3 of those together. So basic performance standards, a series of milestones and performance against targets year by year, and are we actually making a difference here on some of the key intractable areas that have dogged us for a long time, and we will do our utmost to work with whoever we can to make sure we can make an improvement over the 5-year period.
Do you have in mind a measurable statistical improvement? So if you take young people's registration as a good example, do you have in your own minds what sorts of improvements you want to see?
Yes, and I think it is in the plan, isn't it? Let's make sure I get the right numbers. We're pointing me in the right direction. Vijay, you come on. You've got to...
Well, we've put a number of these sort of 5-year aspirations and the data for 2024 and 25 into Annex B of the corporate plan. So at the moment, in some cases, they're quite good. Satisfaction with the system of registering to vote currently sits at 86%. We'd love to get up to about 90%, but that is good. As John says, in some other areas, it is not good. We're down at 47% for satisfaction with democracy, how democracy works in the UK. And we'd like to see a really significant increase of that. That's clearly not entirely in our hands. Turnout at scheduled elections, again, something to keep an eye on. As you all know, it's been steadily falling over time, and we do think some of these projects ought to help in time to help greater participation in general. Confidence elections are well run is quite high, but we think it could go higher. The one, as John has said, which is really very low at the moment, is agreement that spending and funding of political parties and campaigning organisations is open and transparent, which currently sits at 15%, which is about as low as a public opinion poll gets. And we've set ourselves a very, very challenging target indeed of trying, or aspiration, over 5 years of trying to raise that with the government's help, given their commitments, to try to increase people's trust in the political finance system. There's a whole series of those there. We will report on all of these and the other two sets of indicators every year in the annual report and accounts, and very happy to share the data that we have on it in between that.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, what we're interested in, I suppose, is whether you think that's a constant upward progression that you're looking for, or whether you think there'll be spikes and troughs in that progress. But I assume you've attempted to give a 5-year aspiration in order to allow for both of those possibilities.
Yes. None of this, I think, will ever be a smooth evolution, I'm afraid.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Lawrence, are we okay?
Apologies, I didn't ask my question 3. So just wanted to come back on that quickly. Obviously, in your plan, you mentioned the possibility of looking at potential extension on your lease or an alteration request on your lease. How would you, at what stage would you then come back on that to comply with standard IFRS compliance rules?
Well, we, as you know, our officers in Cardiff and Edinburgh and Belfast, the one that this concerns is the office in London, where we're about to have the pleasure of some building works going on in the shared building that we're in. We may need to change the lease after that. We're in the beginnings of discussion with the landlord, and this is just a line in the memorandum to flag the possibility that we may need to come back for funding. We're very confident now that this won't happen in this coming financial year, so we will not be asking, I think, for any form of supplementary. It's just a flag, given how complex the implementation of IFRS 16 has been, that in the next financial year, if we change the lease, we would need to come back for a capital bid in our main estimate.
So you would actually come back, so you don't think any additional costs could be mitigated through existing budgets, no?
We don't, because you take the entire cost of the entire lease, however many years or decades it is, and you accrue that whole cost in capital in the very first year of the lease. So that cost of our entire lease for, say, 10 or 15 years is vastly bigger than any capital budget that we have in any given year.
Okay. That concludes our evidence. Thank you for joining us today. Order.